Sego, bonsoir, good evening, and welcome to our November 8th meeting. We have a moment of personal reflection. Thank you. Please stand for the national anthem. Councillor Gardner, unless...
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thanks for the backup, Dean. Thank you. The acting mayor for this month is Councillor Dean Hollingsworth. We acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Glenn Grant.
Present.
Councillors Claude McIntosh.
Here.
Dennis Carr. Sid Gardner.
Ici.
Dean Hollingsworth.
Present.
Akarile Hébert.
Présente.
Councillors Maurice Dupel.
Present, Madam Clerk.
Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Todd Bennett.
Present.
Justin Towndale.
Present.
And Eric Bergeron.
Present.
All present, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any additions, deletions for tonight's meeting? Hearing none. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Councillor Gardner, Councillor Hébert, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Any disclosure of interest for tonight's meeting? Could I have a motion to go in committee of the whole? Councillor Towndale and Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
We are at the adoption of the minutes, and we have two sets of minutes, those for October 25th and those for November 1st.
We have a motion to approve. Councillor McDonald, second by Councillor Dupel. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
So this evening we have a presentation from the Environment and Climate Change Committee update. And here to make the presentation is the chair of the committee, Elaine Kennedy.
Okay. Thank you for allowing the Environment and Climate Change Committee to make this presentation to you this evening. This slide is to remind you of what you decided should be our mandate when you initiated the committee in 2019. The key points are emissions, adaptation, and offsetting. Our focus areas are important. Local climate awareness. If our citizens don't know and understand what they and we have to do to ameliorate climate change, there won't be the buy-in that is needed to implement change. greenhouse gas emissions. Most citizens have some knowledge about GHGs, but we want the council to understand the city's emissions so that decisions can be made on facts, not myths. No. Climate change adaptation plan, pardon? Oh, sorry, I jumped slightly. No, stick with membership. Sorry about that, folks. Our members are very good at meetings, at speaking up with their concerns and ideas. Okay. And here's our focus areas that I started talking about and skipped number 3. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, so looking at the local climate awareness, I made a comment about citizens need to know what we're looking at, what we want to do. And the greenhouse gas emissions, it's the city's emissions that we want to look at, and you have to make decisions about based on, as I said, facts, not myths. The climate change adaptation plan, this is going to help you make decisions to protect the social, economic, cultural, and environmental aspects of Cornwall. Review research feedback. Political decisions will end up being your job to prepare the city and its citizens for climate change. Next. The tree canopy policy. In November 2020, Council approved the tree canopy and natural vegetation protection and enhancement policy. The original ideas were courtesy Susan Towndrow and Transition Cornwall Plus. Eco Day. That was very successful, and I had the pleasure of joining Praisey Hunter, Jesse Good, Angela Parker, and Catherine Wells to ask citizens where they'd like to go to enjoy nature in Cornwall. So many other activities were very well received by our citizens. Regular meetings. We have been meeting regularly virtually, but have now started to meet in person, which is much more conducive to good discussions. And reviewing policies. We keep our ears and minds open to any new ideas about the tree canopy, green space, trees, and the climate emergency. Our future plans are extensive and will require much help from the city's excellent staff. This past week, I, like many others, have been listening to what is going on at COP26. I am so proud of the council, the staff, and the members of the Environment and Climate Change Committee because we are working together to encourage the citizens of Cornwall and area to be instruments of change. Barack Obama spoke today about governments and the need for them to work together. However, other levels of government and the governments of other countries cannot move as fast as we can at the level that has the most contact with citizens, the municipalities. We can make changes in our lives, the way our city works, and thus the future of our planet, right here, right now, with all your help. I would be pleased to answer any questions, but may refer to the staff for help.
Questions? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. Our landfill site is running out of room. Is it conceivable that incineration, if we built an incinerator, is it conceivable we could build something that doesn't have an adverse effect on the air quality we breathe and emissions and all those other things? Is it within the realm of possibility, or are we just trading one environmental problem with another environmental problem?
In answer to your question, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it is possible because I'm chair of the Public Liaison Committee for Avitas, and many of you will know that Avitas is a company in the industrial park that burns mercaptans and other toxins, and they have such a good scrubber system that one of the things that we found from tests done, phytocology tests that were done, was that the air actually coming to the plant was sometimes dirtier than the air that was going out of the plant. And so therefore, with the proper, making sure that you get a good system, you spend the money so that you have a good system, not a poor one.
Substandard quality.
Thanks, thank you, better word.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I also listened to former President Obama this morning, and your comment about governments getting together, and never mind fighting for votes, but doing the right thing, the hard thing, which is to make sure that we look after our environment. One of the other issues that he said, and I can't quote what he said exactly, but throughout the world, thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people have joined together to protest CAOs and politicians' inactions on this file. They want to see more change. These young people are future voters who, in the words of the past President Obama, will determine the future of the politicians who support climate change. It is real. CEOs of businesses need to take on this head first and heed those young people. They're future spenders. And those companies who do nothing about climate change will pay the price. Just recently, it was announced, and I heard that yesterday, that two of our Great Lakes, Superior and Ontario, have the warmest water that they've ever had at this point in time of the year. Mm-hmm. That means Canada, which has the highest amount of potable water, I'll call not salt-free water, we can't wait till that starts to evaporate till the point where we're in trouble and the environment is going to be in trouble. Also, and I've got 3 minutes, and I'm not taking the 3 minutes, however, there's another issue. I talked to a roofer 2 days ago. And one of the big issues we have here is the clear cutting of the woods when they contract to build houses. He told me that 3- and 4-year-old houses have to have their retiled on the roof because there's nothing to break the wind. 50 and 60 miles an hour. He says he is busy and he can't take on any more business because he's replacing these tiles. We need to do something about our canopy. We need to stop, as a city, contractors who will clear cut just to make a profit. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your time.
Anybody else? Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Lane. Thank you for your commitment to making life better in Cornwall environmentally. I'm old enough to remember when you started up the Cornwall Area Recycling Program called CARP, and a lot of people thought you was a little different and didn't buy into the program. But they would today. You've lived in Cornwall for quite a while. Would you say our air quality is better today than it was 23 years ago, 25 years ago?
Oh, for sure, and I'd just like to correct, I don't live in Cornwall.
Okay.
I live outside of Cornwall, but I call Cornwall home because this is where I worked, and this is where I do all my shopping. Yes, the air quality has improved greatly. I think I can remember when I came here in 1972, and one of the comments back then was that the smell that we had in Cornwall was money. That was wages and what have you. I can remember the first time I went to a meeting in which Courtaulds was being accused of being polluters. And I went to the meeting thinking, oh, we'll have about 2 people there. And I arrived, it was down at Nativity, and I arrived there and I couldn't get in the room. It was jam-packed. And I thought, they're starting to think about their environment. And Cornwall has come a long way, and the people are much more aware, and especially the older generation that know what it used to be like, they realize how much Cornwall has been cleaned up, and it's been good.
Yeah, just a quick note on that one. Back about 24 years ago, the Standard Freeholder ran a front page story on our pollution problems. We had a picture of the mill with all the smoke pouring out of the stacks, and the headline said, "The smell of money."
Yeah.
And we took a lot of a pushback from certain people over that story. I remember that. You know.
Yeah.
Anyhow, would you agree that carbon monoxide and benzene and benzene are bad for the climate?
Yes?
Okay. One of my disappointments with your committee was, I'm going to be quite frank with this, that I just listed 3 chemicals that are in bonfires create. And when we were debating whether to allow bonfires in backyards or not, I didn't hear anything from your committee about that. I have a personal connection with this. A dear friend of mine, the last 3 years of her young life, couldn't spend her time in the backyard because somebody a block away would burn fires in the afternoon. How do you feel about that, the bonfire situation?
I think one of the problems with bonfires is that people do not understand that there's a difference between burning hot and burning slowly. And that's one of the things that people have to be taught about, because if we look at whether or not it's, in some cases, people burn wood as a fuel, and if it's burned hot, then you are not putting out dioxins and furans.
Mm-hmm.
If you burn slowly, it's not just the benzene that you were talking about, it's also dioxins and furans that are put out.
Mm-hmm.
And those are definitely carcinogenic. And so therefore, people have to learn that if you're going to burn for a good reason, and a bonfire is a doubtful reason, it may be pleasurable, but when we look at what's happening to our air quality, well, then we have to think twice about it.
Yeah, I thank you for those comments. Appreciate that. Just my personal thoughts on the matter. Thanks.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. In the report, it talks that 500 Canadian municipalities have already declared a climate emergency. What's next after that? So we declared a climate emergency. What's next for the city of Cornwall if we declared that?
Would you, Mr. Lalonde, would you mind waiting that question until Georgia has given her presentation, which is next?
Sure.
And if she doesn't answer you,
Sounds
then-
like the answer is coming. I can wait. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do sit on this committee, and I just want to say that was a brief summary of all the work we've done, right? This is a council meeting, so we're just getting the real Coles notes here, but there's a lot of work happening on policy. I think there's a lot more coming down the pipeline. It took us a few years to get our feet wet, get organized, how to figure out what our role is. I think that role is only going to get bigger and bigger as we go, and it's a committee I'm proud to sit on, but there's a lot of work that is behind the scenes that wasn't mentioned there, that is, I think we're about to see, including the next presentation as well. Thank you.
Well, Elaine, I like your hat.
Thank you, sir.
And I was going to ask you to introduce your committee if they're here, but I understand they're all going to be presenting, is that correct?
Yes.
All right.
But we also have, one of our other members is sitting over there, Jesse Good, and he's been very active.
Welcome, Jesse. Okay, Elaine, next.
Is this working? Yeah. So hi, I'm Georgia Bach. I'm the Remedial Action Plan Coordinator at the River Institute. And I also sit on the Cornwall Environment and Climate Change Committee as a representative for the River Institute. And I was part of informal subcommittee that worked on this draft or this climate emergency declaration for the city of Cornwall. And we presented it to the Cornwall Environment and Climate Change Committee on October 18th. And we were recommended to bring it to council. So this is where we are. And this presentation is just a quick run through of what we had written down in the declaration. So I'll just read this will be essentially the document. So Whereas the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, states that human activities related to the burning of fossil fuels have warmed the Earth on average 1.1 degrees since the 1800s, and over the next 20 years, the global temperature is expected to reach or exceed 1.5 degrees. Whereas thousands of scientists and government reviewers agree that limiting global temperature rise to no more than 1.5 degrees would help us avoid the worst climate impacts and maintain a livable climate. Whereas there's less than a decade to halve our emissions to avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change, which will bring about catastrophic social, economic, cultural, and environmental impacts. Whereas a growing coalition of governments is committing to net zero emissions by 2050, and that's including Canada. About half of the emission cuts must be in place by 2030 to keep warming below 1.5 degrees. Whereas Canada's Changing Climate Report states that Canada is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world, whereas climate change is currently contributing to billions of dollars in property and infrastructure damage worldwide, stressing local and international economies. Whereas over 500 Canadian municipalities have now declared climate emergencies, and we wrote some examples there. So the most relevant one to Cornwall is probably Belleville, because they have a similar population to Cornwall, and they recently declared it in June 2021. And just to note, the federal government has also declared a climate change emergency in 2019. So whereas current initiatives that the City of Cornwall is undertaking are not sufficient to meet the targets defined by the IPCC scientists. So just there's no existing greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the City of Cornwall. And so it's hard to know how much you're emitting and hard to meet those targets when you don't know how much you're emitting. Whereas the City of Cornwall wishes to protect its economy, community, and ecosystems from impacts of our changing climate. Whereas one of the City of Cornwall's strategic priorities is being leaders in sustainability and climate change impacts. Therefore, it be resolved that the City of Cornwall declares a climate emergency for purposes of naming, framing, and deepening our commitment to protecting our community, economy, and ecosystems for the impacts of climate change. So in declaring a climate change emergency, the City of Cornwall is acknowledging the urgency of the climate crisis and strengthening its commitment to taking action. So we decided that not just to say it, not a symbolic thing, we should also have actions behind declaring a climate emergency. So we listed 4 actions for Cornwall to start strengthening its work on the climate change. So number 1, that the City of Cornwall adopt the national greenhouse gas reduction target as its own. And so the current Canadian targets are 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero by 2050. This is a target not just Canada follows, but many around the world. And many Canadian cities have declared these targets or higher ones, like for example, Kingston wants to be carbon neutral by 2040. And next, that the City of Cornwall join the Partners for Climate Protection, or PCP, by passing the attached council resolution and committing to follow its 5-step framework to create a climate action plan. So its 5-step framework is outlined there. So it's creating a baseline emissions for inventory and forecast, set emission reductions targets, develop a local action plan, implement this plan, and monitor progress and reporting results. So the PCP has been around for more than 25 years. There's over 400 Canadian municipalities that meet, give information, and follow this framework to create a climate action plan. And it's just a place where where you can get advice, tools, help access funding, activities, workshops, etc. And so it's free to join. There's a council resolution right there that's all you have to do is fill out the council resolution and name a staff member that will be following the framework. And the next one is that staff be directed to create a report outlining a process to assess climate adaptation within the community and to determine whether joining ICLEI's building adaptive and resilient communities, or otherwise known as BARC, is beneficial. So adaptation is important. There's addressing greenhouse gas emissions and trying to reduce them, but we also know that we're going to have to adapt. There's already effects of climate change happening now, so what's going to happen to Cornwall down the road? There should be some kind of plan that should be worked on, so it's just directing staff to figure out what that would look like. And the next slide is just more information on the BARC, or the Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities. And that's just, it's a national program focused on resilience and adaptation. And it's a comprehensive way to respond to impacts of climate. It's building on adaptation. So there's other cities that are in this, and it's just staff to look into this program to see whether it's worth joining. And the last action that we were recommending is the City of Cornwall leverage membership. It's already part of the FCM ICLEI Clean Air Partnership, and I believe it's using some of those resources, but to continue use some of those resources. And the Partners for Climate Protection, which was already mentioned earlier, to access technical advice, funding, training for employees. And that's our declaration that we had presented. So
Mr.
Councilor
Mayor?
Bennett.
Thank you very much for that. I wasn't sure when we started taking questions if we're going to present this. That's why I asked the question originally, so I'm glad we presented the whole thing. Am I mistaken that we've been talking about greenhouse gases a little bit on this table? Did we not start an inventorying what our greenhouse gas emissions are, or am I just misremembering?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't think we have directly from an inventory perspective. We do have money that we have set aside in the budget, or the upcoming budget, to, I think, get into more depth with respect to that. And I'm going to look to Mr. DeWitt in case we have any questions on that. But we have started to put money aside for that project. So I'll let Mr. DeWitt make comments.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, we put some money aside in the 2022 capital budget for your consideration. We are looking to match funding from FCM to do a climate action plan, and in that plan there's there will be an inventory for greenhouse gases done for the municipality.
Thank you. So that's coming forward in this budget coming up? Okay. What's going to be my next question is how much is this, do we think these kinds of things are going to cost? But I guess we'll find out soon enough. Thank you.
Councilor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question has to do with our lack of an emissions inventory now. And I'm just wondering how we go about establishing our inventory. Are there formulas? And I presume there are. What are the factors that go into the calculation? And are we up to it?
yeah, so that's why we were recommending that you join the PCP framework, because from my understanding, they guide you through the whole process, and if you don't have the resources, they recommend resources or they help you find funding to get the resources to be able to do each of those steps. And the first step would be the greenhouse gas emissions. From my understanding, it seems like, there's 400 municipalities all working together, and why start, try to use those resources that others are already building on.
So they're not universal factors necessarily. Are they unique to each municipality?
From my understanding, yes, they work individually with the different municipalities and help them figure out a plan and to tackle each of the steps.
Thank you.
Councillor Ebert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thanks to the committee for putting this together. I have to admit, haven't been able to attend the last couple of meetings and was more than pleasantly surprised when I read the outcome of the subcommittee. This is a brilliant declaration, and I say brilliant because many municipalities have declared a climate emergency or climate crisis, but don't really have the actions to back it. They do it in principle, but they don't actually, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk, and I think this allows us to walk the walk at the same time. So really thrilled with what is being proposed and very happy to support it. And I think we're a fairly progressive council, and unfortunately, there's a lot of governments and leaders that are not taking climate change seriously, and I think we can, like it's stated in our strategic plan, we can be leaders in this sector, and hopefully have other municipalities look to the work that we do and see us as leaders and replicate some of the work that is to come. But the climate crisis is already here. We're already seeing impacts of climate change, and so yesterday would have, or last year or the year before would have been a great time to get started on all of this work. But thrilled to see it at the table now. This is bigger than all of us, and there's a Native American proverb that I love when we're talking about climate change, and it sort of goes back to what Councillor Gardner was saying in his comments earlier, but we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And I think that's something that kind of keeps me going when we talk about, fighting climate change, because we're going to leave this earth one day, and we're likely not leaving it in a ideal state for future generations, the leaders, and that's future leaders, and that's why they're so loud in protesting, and they have the right to, because they're the ones that are going to be left with this mess. And so we owe it to them to take this seriously, to adopt this declaration, and to move forward with all of the steps indicated in this declaration. Thank you.
Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, when I brought up before about the young people, I looked at, when I was going through the report, and it's a question I can ask to you, Elaine. Obama said today, and led by a 16-year-old girl, started 2 years ago, I can't recall her name offhand, but I noticed that there was, in the membership part of your report on page 18, that we were missing young people. And there are young people who are afraid for their future, who understand what climate change is going to do to their future. And I would like to see younger people, or one or two young people sitting on that committee. I know it was established that way, but I know you're a young lady, but there are 15 and 16-year-old kids that are mad as hell, and they want to be a part of the solutions. The other thing that I mentioned to some of the councillors earlier on is Municipal World, which is a magazine that we receive monthly, has 4 or 5 articles dealing with climate change and what some of the municipalities are going to try to do about it. And I would suggest that if councillors haven't read it, that they take a look at it, because it was extremely, it grabbed my attention, believe me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, this is why I'm here. This is this is why I ran to be a politician. We're not going to really get into the debate tonight. I originally had thought of making that a today debate, but I think, you know, I like the idea that admin is going to come back. We're going to have a lot more information, a lot more debate, I would say, when this comes back. I don't think it would be the next meeting, if I'm correct.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think we want to try and bring it back pretty soon. So if it's not the next meeting, then be the meeting following.
Excellent, because I'm happy to endorse it. I'm happy to put my name on it. I, of course, helped to work on this a little bit, so there's a little bit of that here. But at the end of the day, this isn't just about declaring an emergency. That's something we can debate separately. This is also about an action plan about what we can do with our little piece of the world here, which we're responsible for. So when this comes back, when this, you know, I will be making these motions, I will be supporting them. And I look forward to our community kind of having that debate in the next 2-3 weeks, because this will become public. This is now known knowledge, and this is what we want. We want our community talking about this. I would urge anybody that is out there listening to be loud in the next few weeks. If you really believe in these things like I do, this is the time to stand up and be heard. And I'm listening, and I'm here, and when this comes forward, I'm happy to put my name on it. Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh.
When we talk about the inventory on greenhouse emissions, are we talking about inventory just of municipal properties, or are we talking about municipal and private properties?
So I'm just one of the people that had worked on this, and I might not know all of the answers, but I think that it would be both. It would be community and city as well.
I'm far from being a scientist. I'm pretty far down the food chain when it comes to that. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. We're going to do an inventory of what? The Benson Center or Walmart or?
Yeah, so it would be, I think, everything within the community, and then everything within the city of Cornwall and what's under the city of Cornwall. Like, I would have to go and read the exact instructions in the partners of the PCP, because it outlines it there, like what you would be moving for.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding is that there's a community and there's a corporate, and that those you're going to be, like, I don't have those defined in front of me right now, but
Yeah.
it is defined, I think, on their website.
Okay. It's still pretty vague to me about how you're going to do this, but I'm not, I'm saying I'm pretty far down the food chain when it comes to trying to wrap my head around that. But when we talk about doing an inventory, I'm going to do an inventory of what, how do you do it, da-da-da-da.
Yeah, I think it's the first, like I haven't been part of this process before either, and we're just researching and seeing what other. Oh, okay, so examples, Elaine is saying are buildings, emissions, and vehicles, et cetera. I think you could probably answer too if you want. No? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, it's still foggy to me, but I know it's going to unravel as the weeks come on and we learn more about this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I think I'm going to follow Councillor McIntosh on. So if we establish targets and we say, okay, we want to reduce 50, 100, whatever the number is, by whatever date, how do we implement that? Do we just try to educate everybody and hope they kind of get on board? Is that what we're doing as a municipality? Like, do we have any authority to oblige people to follow these targets, or do we just hope they do it because it's the right thing to do? Anybody who wants to tackle that question, Your Worship?
Go ahead, Elaine.
I think one of the things that this is one of the things where a municipality can step in, because as an example, if you wanted to cut down on the emissions from what buildings put out when their furnaces run, then perhaps the municipality could give a tax credit to somebody who changes from oil or natural gas to, as an example, geothermal.
Right.
There's a variety of things that can happen, and they're out there. People have done it. There are suggestions of what can be done, and it's a case of the imagination of all of us being able to see, okay, this is one of the problems. What are possible answers? And that's just a small example.
Fair enough. That being said, Your Worship, and I'm not sure if it goes to admin or to the Climate Change Committee, but as one member, I would be interested to see like what we would have in our, I guess, toolbox to actually oblige people to get on board, whether it becomes property standards type legislation or something along those lines. So I don't know, I gather there's going to be a subsequent report I would be interested to see. So it's all fine to say, let's hit these targets, but I want to know how, if we're going to talk about obliging people to get on board, I want to know what we can do as a municipality to physically get them on board, aside from saying, wouldn't it be nice? I think whatever tools we have, I would like to know those. Thank you.
Well, I believe the motion basically talks about administration bringing back a report to council with recommendations, but I believe
I'd like to
as
see
well
that as part of the report, I guess, is what I'm...
that the federal and provincial governments, everybody's on board with climate change, and there's going to be actions at both levels that we'll be part of as the municipality, because we're down the food chain, right? So anyway, there's two motions. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's well received, and my fear is always politicians promise and they don't deliver. And I would like to see, hopefully, the recommendations come back on deliverables. You know, what gets measured gets done normally. And so I think it's important that we, at the municipal level, do the examples where we say we're going to do something and we get it done, rather than at the federal and especially the federal level where those targets are never met, and which is sad because it takes away from politicians' words. And I think this committee has been, as Councillor Bergeron said, this committee had made a statement about climate change, and we're going to follow through as much as possible, as much as we can afford anyway. So anyway, there's two motions, one we missed, but this motion is on this climate emergency declaration. So do I have a mover? Councillor Hebert and Councillor McDonald. I think we've had discussed it quite well, and so all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Now we have one other motion that we missed, and that Council received the update from the Environmental and Climate Change Committee. So Councillor Gardner, second by Councillor Bergeron, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much for your presentation and good work.
Moving on to consent reports. Elected officials' expense statements for the period of July 1st to September 30th, 2021, with a recommendation that Council receive the statement of expenses. RFP 21P11, Radio Communication Consulting Services, recommending that this RFP be awarded to Planet Works Consulting Corporation from North Vancouver, British Columbia, at the total bid price of $180,873.45. Tender 21T22, Air Handling Unit Replacements at the Glenstoredun Lodge, recommending that this tender be awarded to Carmichael Engineering from Ottawa at the total bid price of $1,102,388.38. Tender 21T23, New Emergency Generator at Glenstoredun Lodge, recommending that this tender be awarded to Black & McDonald Limited from Ottawa at the total bid price of $855,351. And tender 21T28 Pathway Lighting Improvements in Lamoureux Park, recommending that this tender be awarded to Dundas Power Line Limited from Chesterville at the total bid price of $438,097.05.
Motion to accept the consent, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Hebert. All in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you.
Reports from unfinished business. The first item is the Remote Worker Attraction Strategy Update, with a recommendation that Council receive this report.
Motion, Councillor Gardner, Councillor Bergeron. All in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you.
Residential Rental Licensing Registry Update, with the following recommendation: that Council A, not implement a residential rental licensing registry; B, direct administration to utilize existing tools and legislation in a cooperative effort to increase public awareness, public education, and enforcement to ensure that residential units in the City of Cornwall maintain a minimum safety requirement.
Councillor Hebert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move a motion to defer until proper and adequate consultation has been completed.
Could you repeat that, please?
I'd like to defer this until proper and adequate consultation has been completed, and I can elaborate if I can get a mover, or a seconder, sorry.
What are you deferring? The
The
recommendation?
decision, the decision on this,
Both A and B?
all of it, yes.
Okay. Councillor McDonald. Do I have a seconder, first of all? Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, and I just speak briefly to it, if I may. I know that I heard, I knew this was coming because in the Mayor's Task Force on Housing, of course, we had a report from the committee who's been working on rental licensing, but the rest of council hasn't. And so what I'd specifically like to happen during the deferral period before this comes back is that we, all of us, become acquainted with the existing tools and the legislation that administration intends to use to increase public awareness and public education and enforcement to ensure that we do in fact reach an effective level of tenant safety. So I hope that when this comes back, or in the interim before it comes back, that we be told by administration exactly what the game plan is that they're asking us to accept in lieu of a licensing registry.
So the deferral with direction is what,
That can certainly be included in the deferral, sure.
did you get all that? Okay. Any, Councillor Hebert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you all for humoring me before I get started. This report states that staff did not look for statistical analysis of participation rates in programs or effectiveness of programs in any of the municipalities that they spoke to. Yes, the city did consult with other municipalities, but the report does not provide any information on how successful the programs have been in other communities. The report fails to objectively address the one key question: does it work? In 2017, our local legal clinic spoke to the folks responsible for the programs in Oshawa and North Bay. Both considered their licensing program to be a success. They saw an improvement in the quality of their rental stock, which means better health and safety conditions for their tenants, increased compliance with standards like Fire Prevention and Protection Act, Building Code, Electrical Safety Code. In Oshawa, they evaluated their program's increased compliance from approximately 20% to 70 to 75%, which also saw a significantly lower reactive inspections for property standards. The public consultation that was rolled out in a way that was not accessible to the most vulnerable tenants in our community. There was no public outreach to obtain in-person responses from tenants. And I understand that the pandemic has made that very difficult, but something that could make such a large impact on our vulnerable population could have waited 12 months to do further targeted consultation. If you look at the online survey results, tenants were the minority in terms of responses when their voices should have been the ones we heard the most of. The results of the report directly affect their quality of life. Public consultation also loses its meaning if it is not paired with proper and accessible education for the program itself. There are key municipal community organizations and stakeholders that were not consulted, and the majority of the non-landlord respondents from the survey did not oppose a licensing. The recommendations in this report will not address the problem. It will not protect our vulnerable population. It will likely look like more of the same, which is not working and is putting people at risk. And if you may, I'd like to respond to some of the rebuttal some of the responses in this report as to why not to proceed. The report states that there are concerns that the development of a program here in Cornwall will have difficulty engaging a high percentage of building owners to register their properties without incentive. If this was a real concern, then the report would include information on compliance from the cities that were consulted. Compliance increases over time. This argument tells us, let's not adopt the licensing because our program will not reach 100% compliance. Instead, let's not have a program and we'll have zero compliance. Compliance would not be reached immediately, but over time, rental units would be identified, but we would need to start somewhere. As for incentives, all licensing programs impose significant fines if landlords do not comply. That is an incentive to comply. The report also states that initial inspections and qualifications into the programs are lengthy, complex, sometimes requiring major renovations for the owners. We do not need to make these lengthy and complex processes. The program can be designed to be limited in length and in complexity by having a simple form to complete, and inspections can be phased in with time. Major renovations would be necessary when there are significant non-compliances with rules and regulations. I think everyone, including our landlords, agree that the health and safety is important, so that these renovations should be done regardless of a licensing fee. It would mean that licensing program is successful if these units are identified and proper renovations are complete. Rather than this report telling us why it won't work, I want to see research on how we can design a program that is simple, efficient, and cost-effective for our local landlords. You're going to stop me, aren't you? Yes. Okay. If there is time after the fact, can I finish my thoughts? That's a question to you, Mr. Mayor.
How much time?
I've got a couple paragraphs left. So I will love to hear more, but I've got more thoughts that I think need to be said out loud.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Bennett.
I'm going to support the deferral, mostly because I had a lot of questions about what we were going to do to protect the more vulnerable in our community that are living in some, I think most of us have gotten emails with black mold on walls and landlords not doing anything about it. And I know that's probably 5 or 10% or less of our landlords that we're dealing with these kinds of issues, but they have to be addressed. And so in this report, it talks about, we could use existing tools and bylaws like the Ontario Fire Code, great. Building code, great. I'm not sure what the noise bylaw is going to do. Property standards bylaw, yeah. Zoning bylaw, traffic and parking bylaws, I'm not sure what they're going to do either. But my question was going to be, if this was going to be debated tonight, was what good are these codes? Can we just go into an apartment if a tenant complains and just go in and check? What's in place to protect the tenant if they do make a complaint and then they get booted? I got a lot of questions about how the people that are living in poor conditions are going to be protected. And we just got an email today from the legal clinic that's 55 pages long that I'd like to get a little more into because I got it home after work and did not have time to read it. And when I started to read it, there was a lot of information in there in favor of the licensing. And so there's a lot of more information I kind of like to digest. And so that email alone we need to read, but also specifics on how these codes that we have currently in place, if they work, why do we have so many people living in horrible situations? So I'm in favor of the deferral and would like to have a little bit more information as to how it can work as opposed to how it can't. Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh.
To follow up on what Councillor Bennett just, do we not have these things? I mean, if somebody's living in conditions that they shouldn't be living in, do we not have any enforcement at all? I'll pick up on this to Chief Weber. Your predecessor had a plan that he was going to do inspections. Fire department was going to do inspections of selected areas in town. Were you aware of that, or does that plan just die?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, that plan has not died. Unfortunately, COVID has gotten in the way of that plan, so door-to-door programs had to put the brakes on for a couple of years here. But we will be returning to door-to-door programs in the future. May not be exactly how the previous fire chief had envisioned them, but they will be, will proceed back to dealing with those issues in the future, of course.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for the response. I thought maybe it just gone away, but you've got it on the back burner. Good. But I go back to the genesis of the question is that do we not have any, if somebody calls bylaw and says, somebody's living in, the electricity's bad here and this is that, the plumbing's bad, just got to suck it up, or do we get involved, or we call somebody that has authority?
MCAO?
I'll refer it to Mr. Wallow.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I would say the same as the fire chief in the sense that this last 18 months, 24 months has been a little bit different for us in terms of being able to access properties. However, I would say that some of the challenges we are faced with when we receive complaints are fairly straightforward, and those are usually resolved. We currently have about 100 cases that are in a file that we're trying to get at. We're probably receiving more complaints these days. I'm not sure if it's because there are a lot more people who are either working from home and just at home, period. So it seems like the number of complaints is going up. As I said, some of the complaints are fairly straightforward, and the property standards bylaw is very helpful. Some cases take a very long time to complete. Some cases involve mental health, which of course is a very complicated matter. In some situations, we're working with the fire department together with our property standards to deal with a file that is fairly complex. Okay. I think what this report is indicating is, I think going into this exercise, we expected that we were going to be recommending a registry. And I believe the meetings that, and I did not sit through all of these meetings, our building officials and Chief Weber did. But at the end of the day, there were some concerns that were being raised by these communities that had these programs. And essentially, at the end of the day, it was indicating that you would need considerable manpower to deliver a program. And I think some of the messaging that we were getting is that what you were trying to achieve, you were not in a better position after having put in this program. I know that some of the indications are that it resulted in not being able to deal with probably 50% of the matters that were out there. So I think what we're trying to achieve then together between the fire department and the property standards department is to actually get out there in a more aggressive way, maybe aggressive is not the right word, active way, to deal with the issues that are out there. In other words, is the registry actually going to make a difference in us dealing with the issues that are out there? I think we thought at first that it would, and I think it can, but it's not necessarily going to get you the results that you're looking for.
Yeah. I guess you've hit on something that's a question in my mind. So I'm a landlord, I register. What's the difference between what's happening now and the guy signs a registry? Does that give you, I mean, what difference does it make?
Well, one of the things that we always wanted to achieve was to get better data.
Yeah.
And that can be helpful for us from a planning perspective. It can be very helpful to the fire department and going out to a call. I'm dealing with, XYZ, Jarvis Avenue. I know it's a triplex because the registry says so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information that would be helpful in that respect, and some of it we don't have.
I can see that, but there are also many, not many, but there are many apartments in this town that you don't even know exist. They're in people's basements, and I know the fire department in the past has expressed concern about that. I think they went to one fire and discovered somebody was living in the basement. Nobody knew that.
Right.
So those are the people you like to target, but they're not going to be registered. Because for obvious reasons, the landlord's not going to say, I'm going to suddenly tell everybody I've got an apartment downstairs. But anyway, I'll defer. I have no problem with that.
Councillor Gardner. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Boileau. How many apartments are owned by out-of-town owners? And how do we deal with people who are slumlords from, I'll just say as an example, cities, Montreal and Ottawa, own apartments in Cornwall and don't take care of them? How do we deal with that? Do we know where they are? Do we know who they are?
I think in that respect, we have the information we need. The tax information can tell you whether it's a owner, someone who lives in this community or someone who doesn't. I don't know that necessarily is always the problem. There are some landlords who live in this community that we have issues with, in addition to landlords who don't live here. So I don't know that Cornwall is dissimilar in that respect to the average community.
Other small municipalities must have the same problem as we do. The other question I want to ask you, do we have the manpower to take care of this now? Because I know there are a number of times when they came to us, bylaw or property standards, whoever was running that department came to us for more money through the budget, and we've turned them down over and over. And I was hearing the department, I believe that Mr. Bray's running now, saying, we need more people. We can't look after the problems. You're telling me that you have a backlog of 50 people? And I'm wondering if we're short manpower, we're putting people at risk that are living in some of those slum apartments. So if we don't have the manpower, please come to the council during budget deliberations and ask for it. Thank you.
So, if I may briefly, we are actually looking at one additional staff person on a contract basis just for the next budget year. So we are hoping to have a more workforce working on the subject. But I think we're also looking to, and going back to the former fire chief Wazin's idea, and that we have the same idea with the current fire chief, is to work more closely together between the fire department and the property standards. And we expect to put something much better in place in '22.
Thank you for the answer. I've brought that up before many, many times, and I'm glad to see you're going to get the manpower you need. I hope at budget time we give you the money that you need to run the department.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. just, I guess, to you, Mr. Boileau, some numbers so that I know what I'm talking about. So technically speaking, if we did a registration program, volunteer, correct? So I'm a landlord, I don't have to register if I don't want to?
Well, if we were to put in a formal program, it's expected that we would get everything and of course, you're not always going to get everything, but your expectation is that there needs to be compliance.
Okay, and if I register, it's going to cost me an extra $400 based on this report on 83. Average cost per property is $400 per year. Am I reading that correctly?
The financial side is what the municipality puts in place.
Okay, so this as a reference point on page 83, if we decided to use Waterloo's example, that means if I own a rental property, every year I'm paying an additional $400 to register my property. Am I misreading this?
I'm less familiar, I think, than
Whoever
Chief-
wants to try it, Your Worship, I'm
Yeah,
open to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
Okay, so I don't have to, it's not voluntary, but you kind of have to catch me if I choose not to. If I do choose, I'm out $400 every year, or 200, or whatever the number is, depending on how we couch it. Now, the other thing is this. Did I read this right? Waterloo is in for 1.4, just shy of 1.4 million bucks to run a registry program?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
Okay, so even if we scaled it down based on percentages of, what did it say? We have more per capita than they have. So realistically speaking, assuming these numbers are correct, and I think the chief, why wouldn't they be? If we're going to commit to this, we're looking at $1.4 million. And I'm assuming, Chief, that's on the presupposition that we're hiring more people, correct? Like that's where the additional cost comes in?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
Okay, so hire more people, $1.4 million. We're going to charge the homeowner, the renters, an additional $300 or $400 or $200 on the notion that they'll voluntarily do it, or maybe they won't, and we'll have to try to catch them. Now, the last question I want to ask to you, Mr. Boileau, is if a tenant has a house that's not very good, so maybe the electrical's bad, there's a leak in the basement, and you and I sat in a meeting where we had something like that, and the basement's full of water. Tenant calls and says, hey, my basement's full of water because the toilet's leaking. We would basically send property standards over there, check it out, and then notify the owner saying, hey, by the way, the toilet's leaking, you better get over here and fix it. Is that how it works right now?
Yes, our relationship is typically with the owner of the property.
Okay, so that being said, how would a registry system change that dynamic? Would it not basically just be the same thing?
Well, it depends how you run the program, but really I think what we're looking for is information about how many units, is it in compliance with zoning bylaw, with property standards, et cetera, and you know, it depends on how you run it. Is it an annual thing? They're not always an annual program. It can be that the information is only provided biannually or you know, every 2-3 years. It really depends on how you run the program.
Fair enough.
Right.
That being said, Your Worship, as a last little caveat to that point, if you decided to run it every 3 or 4 years, then that means between the first time you check till 4 years from now, the house literally can fall apart and we're basically doing the exact same thing we're doing right now. So I am willing to support a deferral in the hopes that somehow there's some new information that's going to change my perspective, but based on what I'm reading and the nature of the discussion, I'm not convinced a registration program is all of a sudden going to make all these houses up to code and everything will be wonderful, any more different than we're doing right now. But I'll go with defer in the hopes that somehow somebody's going to tell me something I haven't heard already. Thank you.
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr. Mayor. I will support the deferral as well. I think that there's much more answers that need to come. I know that through bylaw, I mean, if we're not able to enforce it, you're not going to have any results. And I think to enforce it from sitting on the beginning of Property Standards Committee, you need more staffing to be able to support initiatives such as this. And I just worry that if we do go with something and whatever the fee is that that's determined, I think that, you know, perhaps the tenants will end up, as places become, you rent a new place, I think that the tenants will wear that fee. And I think that charging that fee, there's lots more talks that we need to have, because I'm not sure what benefits there are to the landlords who are all-star landlords, who keep their properties in good shape, who treat their tenants with dignity and respect. So I'm really not sure where this is going, but I'll certainly support the deferral and hope to hear more stuff. I'd like to review the email that Councillor Bennett referred to today, the 55-page email. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carr.
It's interesting to listen to this discussion. I don't know how many of my colleagues have been down in the, what is traditionally called the East End of Cornwall, where some of this is a problem. I can tell you that we have great cooperation from Mr. Boileau and his department and what's going to happen in the future. That's what happened in the past, what's going to happen now. You've got organizations in that end of Cornwall where there's many of these properties, and what's happening is the people who live there want to see improvements, and they're willing to be part of the solution, not just part of the problem. And I think if you wait for a month or so, you will see a tremendous improvement in the attitude and what's going on within that area. There's lots of things that the city can do. Is it going to cost money? Yes, it is going to cost money, because you have to have those inspectors who will go and examine the property and say, okay, this is what needs to happen, and this is probably what it's going to cost. And I think people like the associations that are in the East End, which is where a lot of these problems are, you've got the Renaissance Group, who are very much involved in this kind of work. You've got the Le Village Association, again a part of the group, who are aware of all these problems and are willing to work to see them all corrected. It's not going to be a fact that if you put in this legislation and you have this committee for safety and for building improvements, that's going to solve all the problems. No, it won't. It's the people who live there and the people who own properties there and the organizations who want to see improvements, because it has an impact on their properties too. It's them all working together to solve these problems. And right now, I'd say to you, I've seen more statements of people who will work in cooperation with the city, with the departments in the city, and there's every reason to be optimistic about what could happen if the city, and particularly City Council, supports their efforts. And I will take it upon myself to report back to City Council through the Mayor's office and inform him what's going on and how it's going to affect everyone, and he'll all be involved. So I think we have a unique opportunity here. We've got a group of individuals who are willing to work. Look at, for instance, look at the developments that have happened in the last few years along the waterfront. Look at those things. Do you think those people that are buying those condos want to see the balance of the neighborhood in the state some of those buildings are now? No. They're willing to assist and help to clean up the neighborhood if that's what it takes. So I think there's every reason to be optimistic. And I think that a group will come and make a presentation to council within weeks, within a couple of weeks, and tell you what they want to do, but they'll be looking for council's assistance.
Stick to the motion.
At the same time. Well, that's going to be the motion. Right now, the motion doesn't do anything.
Anybody else? I have a problem with the deferral. One of the reasons is this is on our unfinished business listing, and I read the report, and then one of the actions is the B part is to direct administration to utilize existing tools, legislation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's all there. I don't know what else we're going to learn. I'm not going to support the deferral because I think everything's here. The only thing I would change is not implement a residential license registry at this time. Then it gives you the ability, without a 2/3 majority or notice of motion, to implement it at a later date if you don't think this is working. But I won't support the deferral because I don't think it's necessary. Everything's here. I don't know what else we can learn. How long has the administration worked on this? Councillor DePel?
Point of clarification, Mr. Mayor. I think that we need to know, to have it fully, to be able to do even B with the enforcement, do we have that manpower available right now that can handle the 100 complaints that Mr. Boileau refers to?
Well, we'll find out in the at budget time. But I think everything's here. I don't know what else we can, but I listen to my counsel. So nobody else?
May I take 50 seconds to close up, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
50 seconds.
50 seconds, time me. Some of the comments that were mentioned recently, you know, the $400, we don't have to charge $400. There was a lot of questions about how are we going to do this? That's what I was expecting in this report. How, and then why not, just to see both. Some of the concerns about, you know, how different this would be to the status quo. Unfortunately, we have landlords who are just not following through with the necessary repairs. I'd also like to hear from Legal Aid to come and present to us. I'd like to hear from our Social Services Department on this initiative. I'd like to have a more targeted consultation with tenants. And if landlords do not comply, then there are fines that we can certainly put in place in this program once we've developed it targeted to our community. But we unfortunately have vulnerable people living in incredibly unsafe situations. And if this was a couple of years ago, those folks could have packed up and moved and found another apartment. You know, they don't have to deal with the mold, they don't have to deal with, you know, the draft, all of these things. They can take their children and find another apartment. We're in a housing crisis right now. It's created a rental crisis. They cannot do that. They were to pack up their children and go to a different apartment of the same size and quality for their children, they would be paying significantly more for their rent, which they cannot afford right now. So the options for these vulnerable people are to stay in these unsafe apartments or to be homeless. And so that can't be an option anymore, and we need to be able to have teeth to enforce some of this. And this isn't majority of landlords. If it's 10%, 5%, even 2%, we need to be doing better. Unfortunately, we have a lot of folks struggling, and we're in a position right now with the multiple crises that we're dealing with our community that we need to be doing better. We need to at least try to do better. And so before I vote on doing this or not doing this, I want to hear more from other community agencies, from people who are actually struggling, before we make a final decision. Thank you.
Motion to defer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Unfinished business listing. We're looking for a recommendation to receive this listing.
Motion. Councillor Bennett, Councillor DePel, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Communication reports. We have one, MTO Connecting Links Funding Program, with a recommendation that Council endorse the submission of an application to the 2022-23 MTO Connecting Links Program, and that the project submitted for the funding program be a municipal class environmental assessment for Brookdale Avenue from 7th Street West to 14th Street West.
Motion. Councillor Carr, Councillor Gardner. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
We have no new business motions, Mr. Mayor. So bylaws 2021 122 to 124 inclusive, listed on the agenda, are being presented to council for adoption.
Motion, Councillor Tapal, Councillor Bennett, all in favor? Opposed, carried.
And we are at reports from standing, advisory, special, and ad hoc committees, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to say that there are a couple of pretty important pre-Christmas events coming up in the arts community. One of them is the Seaway Valley Theatre Company annual children's play, the first 2 weekends in December, and coming up for the last 2 weekends in November, a show in a store front in the Sears Mall of Focus artwork. There should be well over 100 pieces of work on display and for sale.
Very good. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank Catherine Wells for her leadership in the Remote Workers Committee, and also to staff, our HR manager, and Bob Peters, who have really helped us get to the end of this. I believe we're close to the end of it. And of course, Councillor Bergeron. Thank you for the work.
Thank you. Moving on.
There are no new notices of motion, Mr. Mayor, and so the confirming bylaw is being presented for adoption.
Motion. Councillor Carr and Councillor Gardner, all in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you and have a good night. Motion to adjourn. Almost forgot again. Councillor Towndale and Councillor Bennett. All in favor? Have a good night. Thank you.